Hello, dear audience. Feast of Healthy Thoughts continues its conversations, and we are here together with you to continue, maybe to finish the conversation, the topic we started last time about a very phenomenal reality that is part of our life. We were talking about fear, and there are many types of fear that we go through. Some of them are good, some of them are not good, some of them are preventive, and some of them teach us a lesson. And most of the time we are afraid because of unknownness, because we don't know what's behind the curtain that we cannot see through. And I will bring another example from my life. When I was first grade, it was the fashion of the time to send their kids to the musical school. And I grew up in a village, and the musical school was in the town. And my parents bought the piano, and it was my turn to go to the school. And one of my friends told me that, you know, those kids in the town are very mean. And that created a lot of fear inside of me. And when my father came and tried to convince me to go to school, I refused. I refused to the end. I did not agree to do it, to the extent where he said, okay, but when you grow up and you want to know how to play, don't blame me. Later on, I went to the town and I realized the kids were not that mean. And I was blaming myself and thinking, well, if I wasn't afraid at that time. Welcome, Presbytera. Thank you for your time and energy and the experience that you share with us. What would you say about this kind of fears that can cause problem for the human being, can change the life? Yes, we know that everything is by the will of God. Everything is providence, like we had in our second conversation here. But sometimes we wish it wasn't that way, and we continue doing similar things. I was afraid then, I missed my opportunity, and I have missed many opportunities since then, and I still keep missing because of that fear of unknown.
I think you're describing not just regular fear, you're talking about anxiety, which maybe we can call that fear and worry. It's a little bit more generalized, it's less specific. I'm not sure if that's going to help you with looking back at your childhood and your fear about facing the children that could be mean. That came from someplace. Maybe it was a little bit about something you saw as a child. Maybe part of it was just your own makeup. And that's not a good or bad thing. Just all of us are wired in a particular way. One of the words psychologists like to use as a way to pay attention to the human person, how we're all different, is the word temperament. All of us have different temperaments. Some of us are wired a little bit more sensitively one way. Others of us are wired more sensitively another way. And it's all good. It's just a variety of ways. And so if there were another person under the same circumstances as you, maybe the music issue would not have been a problem. But how the combination in your life happened, maybe it was fear, maybe it was anxiety. It was too much at that time to go that direction. But that's telling me today, and maybe reminding you, that this was not just a regular fear. This must have been some kind of source of anxiety that may have been partly from outside, partly from within. And just to notice that. And so since God's not done with any of us yet, you know, what does this have to say today? It did influence you. Yes, you didn't do this direction in seminary. You went another direction in seminary, which maybe is for you the higher calling. I want to say, without sounding superficial or simplistic, this can all be very good. And sometimes when we knock ourselves, and I'm using you as an example, you're sort of putting yourself down right now, it's so easy for us, and it is also psychologically, clinically verified. It is very easy for the human person to find what's wrong with them, what they did wrong, what they think they did wrong, and that might be 5 or 10% in certain decisions, and the 80 or 90% that might be neutral or good, we ignore that and forget to be grateful and to cultivate that. I'm not saying don't know what's weak, but sometimes we forget our strengths, and that takes a different kind of courage to look at, that we acknowledge our strengths as well.
Now we speak about music. If I'm not a musician, my life is not ruined. I can develop my life in different direction, like you said. But also there is the other phenomenon that some people do not admit that they believe in God, or they don't go to that direction because they are afraid of it, that it will change their life, that the society will not look at them like they looked before. For example, when I first decided to go to the seminary, it means that I'm admitting to myself that I believe in God. I went to the priest, a village priest who was just appointed, and the whole entire village is atheist. I told him about my decision, and he gave me the daily prayer book of the church. And he said, okay, I'll take you to the seminary, but just to prepare yourself, go read these prayers, because they might ask you what is read when, because most of the seminarians had a prior church service experience before they went. I didn't. I had zero. I took the book. Now I'm going home. I'm like, what are my parents going to think about me? If I go into the house with this book in my hand, they immediately will guess where am I coming from, and they will start asking questions. So I hid the book. I put it in my shirt, and that's how I went to the house. Like I mentioned in the beginning, in the first episode, that I wasn't afraid of my parents since I was a child. I did not want to disappoint them in any circumstances. I would be very sad if I realized my father or mother are disappointed, but I wasn't afraid of them. But here I was careful not to show what I am, or who I am, or what is my intention in the future. And I had to prepare them slowly, and then I took out the book. So then everything was okay. So what do you think about this kind of fear, that people sometimes say, I don't believe in God, but you realize that it's impossible, first of all, and second of all, they don't admit it because they are afraid?
Well, God's not done with any of us yet, and God knows our hearts. And there are many people I know who, even externally, could be very harsh, they could look like they're a mess, and maybe really be a mess. I'm thinking of the 5th century Saint Mary of Egypt, for example, who is a famous Reformed prostitute. She's famous because of her repentance. When she was a prostitute, she was one of the most active, famous people in Alexandria, known for her filthy mouth, known for her chasing her prey down. May I get more graphic than that? Not necessarily, but the church records were very graphic, which is kind of interesting. But even then, when you look at her life, and people who have been studying her life, as it progressed, she became open to the love of God. She needed the love of God desperately. And so I think something happened in her that made her curious about Christians, made her open to the love of God. And so that openness was there, kind of waiting to come out, even in the depths of her worst depravity. So it's wonderful if we can remind ourselves not to judge, to remember God's not done with any of us yet. And yes, this is very, very hard to do. Every day I fail at this with people who are difficult in my life. But it's good to try to apply this with everyone we know, that God's not done with any of us yet, because there are some surprises waiting for us, good surprises.
Presbyter, we talked about the fear that can prevent from believing in God. But there is the opposite also. The blame of the atheism to the church was that all the religions were born of fear. In other words, people who, or humanity being afraid of the outside forces or unexplainable realities, they created the religion. And Christianity is one of those religions. And I just recently heard the opposite, that it's not that the faith comes from fear, but fear comes from faith. This is a healthy type of fear, that when you believe in God, then you have a respect towards God, which, like an awe, like you explained in the first conversation. So it's kind of, the blame is kind of reversed.
There's a good kind of fear, that awe,
yes,
that's based in humility, that we are right-sized in the presence of God. Sometimes we might have to rise to an occasion, so we have to stand up, and that takes courage, and that takes the courage to stand out when we stand up. We're going to look different, like you were afraid of looking different to your parents. Once you let them know, once you kind of help them realize that you were ready to make this kind of commitment, but that was a big change for you. And so sometimes stepping up also makes us more visible and an easier target, and an easier target to be rejected or to be jeered at or what have you. Sometimes humility invites us to be smaller, to be right-sized in the presence of God. Especially when everybody around us is being grandiose and puffy, it's really a liberating thing not to play that game of being huge and grandiose and puffy and allowing ourselves to be small and supple and right-sized, whatever that size might be. I kind of use the image of Raggedy Ann, to be pliable and supple with eyes wide open, facing the direction we need to be facing. I said this to my class a couple of weeks ago at the seminary, and I think I was dating myself, and they didn't understand Raggedy Ann, but they understood Gumby. And someone took out a little Gumby, and it's like, well, Gumby's pliable, and Gumby's got big eyes, and I can turn Gumby around. And I go, well, okay, sometimes we have to be small like Gumby. But there's more life in being small, and there's more life in being big sometimes when it's right-sized in the presence of God. That takes courage and face some kind of fear that comes with that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's good fear.
When we speak about the courage, I have heard that many army leaders or famous generals who led their armies to the war against the enemy for righteous purposes to protect their country, or that even the bullets did not get them. We have legends about one of our generals right after the genocide who was liberating Armenia from the Turkish yoke. They say that he went on a white horse, and the very beginning of the army, even the enemy knew his horse. Everybody else's horses were different color, and his was always white. They tell that there were many snipers who specifically had the agenda to shoot him only, and they never got him. The enemy could not get this person because of his courage, because of his sacrificial love for his nation. Courage and being free from fears can give us qualities like this. Yes, it's healthy to prevent pain, like Freud says, but what about this? When a person is so courageous, does not even think about the pain, does not care if they will kill him, he is doing his mission, and here comes the miracle that happens.
Well, he was doing his mission. And I'm sure most of his life, he felt the kind of pain and fear that we were talking about. But there comes a time, you know, we've joked in the past about finding the right cross. You know, life is hard, and there's suffering to be had. And how do we grow when life is going smoothly? How do we grow when life is hard? And how do we make the sacrifices that are authentic to our lives? And so it's an issue of discernment, to discern when it's our turn to do X and when it's our turn to do Y. And maybe we have to do the Y or the X. And sometimes one is for us more than the other. And it looks like for him, at this point in his life, out of love for God, out of love for his people, he was filled with I think it was love, from what you're talking about. It was the love that gave him the courage to lead his people into battle. Just like a mother can be very much like a mother bear. When her children are in danger, all of a sudden that love inspires in her a kind of courage and stamina and quickening of intelligence that most of the time, and because we might have to have another discussion on fear, because there are a lot of things that happen in fear, especially when people are afflicted, when people are in oppression, and that's a whole other conversation. And somehow we hear these stories, these wonderful stories of a mother being able to pick up a car to save her children, of a mother bear doing whatever it is to save her cubs.
Other birds attacking the cat to save the babies.
Exactly. Or if you walk on the Cape Cod Canal during the spring, as sometimes I do with my dog, if we happen to be going by a tree where there's a nest of the seagulls, those seagulls start attacking you, meaning me, and the dog, because they don't want you near the tree. And you know not to walk that way for a few weeks till the babies are are independent and the tree is liberated from the protective mommy bird. And so I'm just imagining that's what happened to him, that he was just in his zone, so to speak. He had found his final mission, which was to love his people, love his country, and lead them to where they need to be. That's a source of inspiration, I think, for many of us.
Yes, he has a very famous expression. He suggests people to do the least for their nation. He says, when you go to bed at night, when you put your head on the pillow, that's how exactly he says, think about your nation a little bit before you fell asleep.
Another person who comes to mind is Mother Teresa, who died a few years ago. And some people have tried to defame her by making public some parts of her journal where she talks about her fears and she talks about her doubts, which I think is wonderful to inspire us that this is what faith looks like. It's okay to be walking the path you really believe is the most important and most authentic for you in your life, in your mission in life, and still feel doubt even as you're walking forward. But I bet also for Mother Teresa, temporarily that doubt would disappear the second she saw someone that she loved that she needed to help, because there's Christ.
Yes, and now you reminded me of Father Arseny. I read recently in the concentration camp, they count the prisoners every day twice. And it's in Siberia, it's 40 below 0 Celsius degrees. And it says in the book that even the guards with their heavy coats were freezing to death when they were outside. And they bring these half-naked prisoners outside, count them, and then turn them in back. And Father Arseny is one of them. And everybody knows him. He's helping everyone, even despite the fact that he was a very old person. But he's helping young people, strong people, no matter what. He had that strength of faith that kept him alive. And in one of these counting exercises, they're standing outside and one of them is missing. And it turned out that somebody fell asleep inside of the barracks and didn't hear the bell. And for this reason, they bring them in, bring them out, and they're standing in line, and they're freezing. And then all of a sudden, this young man runs out of the building in tremendous fear, because that can mean the end of his life. He was late. And the author says that they start beating him, the guards. And he's on the ground, on the ice. And the person who stands next to Father Arseny, he says that all of a sudden he came out of the line, walked to the guard, and yelled at him, "Stop it! Stop it now!" And he says that, I thought, he's the storyteller, I thought this is the end of this old priest. He is out of his mind. And then he says he walked back and stood back in his line. And the guards stopped beating the person. They let him go, and they let everybody else go too. And he says, we went in, and I don't believe my eyes. And I'm waiting until they will come and take Father Arseny. And nobody shows up. And then he says, I couldn't believe it. I went to the other person who was standing on the other side of the priest. And I asked him, did you see what he did? That old priest, he wasn't afraid? And the person said, what are you talking about? He was standing next to me all the time. He didn't move. There are people like this, like Mother Teresa. You brought an example. I was very inspired by Father Arseny. When I was a student in Armenia, before the seminary, they were taking everybody to the army because there was a war between us and our neighbors. And they were catching everybody from the street. If you have a little bit facial hair, that means that you can fight. They put you in the bus and you go right to the army, and right to the war zone. No training, nothing. There is no time to train. And everybody was really scared of this, because there were many innocent deaths, and people who shouldn't be there for their physical or health issues, they were there no matter what. And one morning, I'm coming out of the metro station, and when the escalator brought up to the ground level, I see the walls of the army guards standing from escalators to the doors. Basically, nobody can escape. Whoever comes out goes to the other room and goes to the army. Yeah.
And you were of draftable age.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm 18 and a half, which is
That's
the
very
perfect time.
Perfect.
The first thing when I came out was a fear that this is my end. I'm not going to make it to school today. And then I said, well, God is with me, and if I don't have to go to the army, I will not go. And I hung my head and I walked through this wall of soldiers. And I see people being drafted from behind and in front of me. And I come out of the metro station and they didn't ask me. I mean, I didn't look like a soldier, or I wasn't good enough for them, or whatever. I went to the college that I was student at, and there were only 2 girls. The rest of them had been drafted that morning. There was like a big one at that time, at that day. It was a miracle for me. First impulse was a fear. That's it. And then the second was, well, if it's God's will, I will go. It's okay. If not, let me go through.
You literally walked through your fear.
And things like this can happen if we overcome our fears, I think. And just be free and do what is necessary to do.
Did you feel fear? Did you feel scared as that was happening, or you were just concentrated on getting through the line and getting through to the other side?
First impulse was the fear, and then kind of like anesthetized.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I couldn't feel anything. I was just
That's a good thing.
getting out of there.
That's a good thing.
Question about an expression that I heard. This is a quote from Elder Silouan. He said, "Keep your mind in the hell and despair not." This has become a famous expression after his life. Now, we are afraid of after-life experiences. And Lord commands this elder during entire his life to keep his mind in hell.
This is a very spiritually advanced question to ask someone, and I'm not that advanced. I'm happy to share some ideas. I remember hearing this expression also, and I don't, for the life of me right now, remember the context in which Father Silouan, whom we recognize as a very holy person, found himself to say that. In my imagination, he's talking to monks, and it's important to remember death. There's a gift that we talk about, a spiritual gift, which is called the remembrance of death. And that the more we are aware of that remembrance, the more we are in touch with our finiteness, that we are specks of dust, that we are specks of clay, yes, created in the image and likeness of God. And so by remembering our clayness, remembering our finiteness, and yes, to say hell is also saying, don't get any wise idea, don't you dare get any wise ideas that you're an exception, because we all have that little spark in us that we want to be the exception. And that spark also comes from God, in the sense that we are all unique human beings called to grow in our sense of personhood. And so all persons are unique. And so that's the good side of being unique. That's the good side of being a person that God wants us to become, the persons He Himself is creating us to be. So we don't know who that is. It's God knows who we really are. But by keeping the remembrance of death, keeping, and no exceptions, this means you. Remember hell, okay. And despair not. Yes, because we are in the presence of the love of the living God, thrice holy.
The reason I ask this question is to go to more into a spiritual level of feeling fears. Because what can be more fearful than of hell that will follow our death? And it can be any second. One of the messages from my dream was, as I said, that I can die any minute, any second. And we're driving on a highway, it can happen any second. And so there are spiritual forces also. We know that this physical body is not the end of our life. Part of the reason that Adam and Eve fell is because there was a negative force there who led them. And the Church Fathers explain this in different ways, why this happened. But the main object was the evil that led them out of their way. And we can be afraid of this too. Sometimes we feel presence around us that is fearful. At night, even adults, when they're alone home, sometimes they are afraid. I remember my mother wouldn't sleep until my father got home because she was afraid of going to bed when it was dark. She was afraid of turning off the light and going to bed when my father wasn't home. And I had to stay up with her because she would be even more scared if she was alone without anybody being present. And even the presence of a small child, like I was maybe 3, 4 years old, was kind of a courage for her. And I'm sure that these things exist and they give us reason for being afraid. What do you think about this kind of fears?
Well, I think the bottom line, the issue is humility and what's being humble. Our being, as I said a few minutes ago, right-sized in the presence of God, that we are grounded in the humus, in the clayness of our being, that we are just specks of dust, specks of clay, created in the image and likeness of God. The more we are trusting that God is holding us, that God is leading us despite our foibles, despite our pain, despite whatever may be happening, the more that makes us receptive to giving the good and allowing the power of love and God to be more active in our lives. And so that's the fundamental focus, I think, of all these discussions. Yes, we do have to name the sin. Yes, we do have to name when bad things are happening. I want to add something to what you're saying. I had a discussion with someone who talked about the end times, okay? And this person said, all the signs of the times point to the Antichrist. And there's a sort of a fundamentalist group of Orthodox that I know that are really promoting that. And I understand where that comes from, and I understand, I respect that, and there's much to be ascertained from that. At the same time, that's really not how the Orthodox traditionally understand looking at the signs of the times. This is related to what you're saying. The signs of the times don't point to the Antichrist. They have to be discerned, as we're told to in Scripture, discerning the sign of the times, discern the signs of the times, because they all point to Christ. Not the Antichrist, Christ. And so that turns everything upside down. So we're looking at the same phenomena, and either we're looking at them in the proper direction, which is toward Christ, or we're empowering other entities. Okay? So when you're asking these questions about fear, and even the spiritual forces that happen, yes, we have to talk about them. The fundamental weight, however, has to be on the love of God. That God loves us to folly. That the second person of the Trinity would have become human for just one of us. Never mind the millions and millions and billions and billions that have been born over time. This would have all happened if there was just one human being that was ever created. And so to remember that this is the context in which we find ourselves, that the love of God saturates the cosmos even now in ways we don't understand because we're kind of distracted and we're still trying to grow in our purity of hearts. But maybe someday, if we're granted that purity of heart, we'll see that. And so this is the reality in which we find ourselves. And so as we rest in that reality, sure, we can look at how we get tripped up by the evil one. And yes, the fall started with the serpent, is the language that the scriptures used to talk about other creatures with free will in paradise or in the garden, whatever way we want to phrase that, to complete the fall, so to speak, by bringing humanity in, which is what happened. But to remember that the spiritual forces really don't like humanity. Why? At least the writings that I've read from our tradition tell us that these spiritual forces don't like humanity because we remind them of God. We are created in God's image and likeness. Even now, the sorry state we find ourselves, they aren't crazy about looking at us because we remind them of God. And so, but there's so many traps and tricks out there in the world, in the fallen world, that they've sort of set for humans that they don't, we shouldn't flatter ourselves that we can provoke their interest. Okay, that's the vast majority of human beings on the planet. Now, some of those human beings that may be a little bit more advanced, that are becoming more authentic in the presence of God. God is filling them more. Well, there comes a point in their growth where they might get, these human beings might get their attention. All right? And so, but we have to be careful. When we are down, when we are despondent, when we are being attacked by demons, maybe it's some of our stuff, or maybe it's some of the traps that were laid out around us in the created order, the suggestions that the church makes are all about the same. We turn our attention to God. We focus our attention on the love of the Lord. We bless the moment with the sign of the cross, because all of creation is subject now to that cross and is liberated through that cross and is fulfilled in the joy of the cross, even as we speak at this very moment. And that's a good thing. We don't have to remember much. My grandmother would say, well, you know, if you find yourself in a bad situation, you do the sign of the cross. And if you can't, say your hands are tired or tied, you can even do it with your mind. In other words, to turn our whole life and attention to the loving surrender of God and to commit ourselves to that. And that in itself is an incredibly powerful thing to rest with.
I remember when you mentioned about the cross, I remember a small story about a person who was just getting ready to become Christian in the earlier times, and he was not baptized yet. And the story says that he was traveling through the desert, and at one point, when he gets tired, he decides to sleep. He lay down on the ground and put his bag under his head and fell asleep. But before he fell asleep, he remembered that all the Christians do sign of the cross with everything they do. Before they eat, before they sleep, before they go to way or something. And okay, and he knows that he's not baptized yet. So he makes the sign of the cross and lays down to sleep. And then it says that the evil spirit who was in the desert, because that's where they are, starts looking for somebody to tempt and comes and sees from very far distance, there you go, one person, no baptism. You can see from the distance that that person doesn't have baptism on. And that's the best target, so let me go get him. And he goes closer and closer and closer. When he gets very close, when I can see him already, and the story says that he saw that the sign of the Lord was on him, so he couldn't touch him.
Some people who might be listening to us right now, we're talking about the sign of the cross, we're talking the power of the cross. It might sound odd or strange or semi-superstitious, and I'm saying, okay, but have an open mind. That creation and the spirit world, in our understanding, are one world. All of creation is not cut in two or cut in three. It's all one world. And so if we believe that the second person in the Trinity became human, which we do, God became a human person, a human being for real, all of matter has been changed. In his ministry that we all know, to fulfill his mission, which included surrendering his life on the cross, and that cross has now become a source of victory, that this sign does have a power to it, that when we align ourselves with that through the light of love, through the light of trust and hope, is a very powerful thing.
We speak about reality beyond the physical life, and part of it is the death. And I heard an expression, not everybody can live as a Christian, but everybody can have a Christian death. I understand the first part, that nobody can live Christian life because it's becoming like Christ, living the same way that he did.
There's ancient prayers that go back to the early church. We pray for a good death and a good response at the fearful judgment seat of Christ. Fearful, both in the fullest sense of the word fearful. I'm wondering if this is more dying with integrity, dying with the courage to die with integrity. But you're making me remember the last few days of my father's life, when we were at the hospital, where he had angels who were nurses looking after him, who had seen many deaths occur, especially from the type of lung cancer that my father had. There are many times I've called them nuns, and I think because of the love that they brought to the patients, and that the otherworldly appreciation. Because one of the nurses said to me, and I think I might have shared some of this before in another episode, that and my dad tried very hard not to have many medications. He wanted to be lucid. So he asked for as little medication as possible. And so there were times when he was writhing in pain. And those last few days, he was writhing in pain like I'd never seen before, and we would just bear witness to that. And the nurse said that, I've seen this before, and some of us talk about this, the nurses. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, many of us think that this is the struggle the human person has as the soul is struggling to separate from the body. And this is a real struggle, and it's very painful. And it takes a lot of courage to do. And she never read Orthodox theology, because this is exactly what the writings of the Fathers talk about, that to be fully human is to be a psychosomatic entity, is to be both physical and spiritual, and that both those parts are needed to be a fully functioning human being. When those are torn away, it's excruciating. And so to hear a nurse point that out, and that she said that lovingly, because A, because she'd seen it before, and B, she was respecting, almost venerating my father's valiant fight to do this well. And I'm wondering if this is a small example of having a Christian death.
You reminded me of the story that Metropolitan Anthony tells when he was a doctor. He says that the soldier who was dying in the hospital from the wounds was very afraid and also alone. When he went to him, he was a monk already at the time, secretly. He asked him how is he feeling, and he said that he's very afraid because he's alone. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And Metropolitan says that he held his hand and said, don't be afraid, I will be with you. I will be there with you to the last second when you don't feel my hand anymore. He says, when I hold his hand, and I told him, as long as you're feeling my hand, remember I'm with you. Know that I'm with you, so you're not alone. Don't be afraid of anything. It will be okay. And the minute you don't feel my hand anymore, then you will be in somebody's hands, and somebody will be taking care of you. Don't worry about that part either. So there's no reason to be afraid of anything.
It's facing the truth. Our fears come and they go as we face the truth. Now, for us, truth is a person. The day before my dad died, and I might have shared this story before, so forgive me, maybe it was a different context. We had this conversation, and he said to me, it was our last conversation actually, tell me the truth. What is it, Daddy? This is August 5th, on a Sunday. He died August 6th, Monday. Tell me the truth. Okay, what, Daddy? I'm dying, aren't I? Yes, you are, Daddy. You're dying. Well, when? And his honesty, wanting to know. And I said, Daddy, I don't know. Tell me when. Baba, which is Daddy in Greek. Baba, I don't know. I don't think today, and I'm saying to God, please don't make me a liar. But it could be tomorrow. It could be the next day. It could be in 3 or 4 days. It could be in a couple of weeks. I don't know. Okay. And then he said something like, well, tell me how now. And I said, Daddy, I don't know. I think you will probably be getting weaker and weaker, and God will be becoming stronger and stronger, and you will at some point surrender your life and your whole self into His hands. But that's really between you and God. Okay, but that's not what I'm asking. Okay, Dad, what do you want? What do I do now? And I said, do you want to pray? Yes. So we prayed together, and we said the Lord's Prayer together.
Once you mentioned about the sins, that they have to be named, and then that's the first step to get rid of it. Same way is the fear, I think, because many of us sometimes think that we are not afraid of anything. Sometimes people who feel like they are very courageous, they have fears also, and it's nature. I want to bring an example here. It's very beautifully pictured in the film of Spartacus, when he is led to crucifixion, and Caesar meets him on the way. And Spartacus is very courageous, and he inspires fear. And Caesar screams and slaps him on the face. and Spartacus doesn't even move. It's pictured in a way that it shows how scared the Caesar was from him. But in a sense, he's not afraid of anybody. And in the surface, he is the king. He is not afraid of anybody. Everybody is subject to him. But they show that even a person of this height can be afraid of a slave who is courageous. So in some sense, we all have this kind of fears that we don't want to say. We're afraid of mice, but we don't want to say because...
One about Caesar slapping Spartacus's face because he was afraid of Spartacus, what it meant. He was more free, and at that moment the Caesar was less free. But from that exchange, Caesar at that point makes Spartacus his equal, if not his superior. Mm-hmm. And so when someone in authority or leadership is calling attention to someone far beneath him or her in this manner, is elevating that other person's status. And so that's how out of control Caesar was by that time in the story. So whatever courage Spartacus had in the story obviously brought Caesar to his knees. The other part about fear of mice and all these other things, it's admitting and naming. It's a twofold thing. To admit we have a fear. I was yesterday in fear all day for something. All day. All day. I had appointments, I had to see people, and it didn't get better until I admitted it to myself. That, oh, you are anxious because of blah, 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 blah that you did, or that you're in the middle of. And so even just by admitting it, it doesn't feel good. It means I'm less perfect than I thought I was. It means I have many more unfinished business I need to do today or in my life. And so by admitting that, it's a humbling act. It doesn't feel good to admit that I'm another thing I'm powerless over. But also naming it by saying this is what the fear is also claiming my relationship with God. The second I was able to say, this has been eating at me, this has been taking up too much of my space, in a sense, until I admitted it and called it out by its name, it was God. It had my attention temporarily. You know, I really want to do the real God, but temporarily I was really feeding this fake God of my fear, which is a real fear, by the way. But the moment I had the humility to admit it to myself, to name it, my anxiety went down, and I was able to focus more clearly on what had to be done, and also to ask God for help, and ask people for help. And I started calling up my friends and started talking about it, so that even though this is still not resolved, I'm much more peaceful. It's much better now that I'm trying to worship the real God as opposed to the fake God that was giving me all this fear.
Thank you, Presbytera. Thank you very much for being brave enough to even share your fears with us and let us know about them. Thank you, dear audience. We are running out of time. We have a couple seconds left, and we'll see you next time. We'll continue maybe this conversation. Have a good day.